Welcome to the Accelerating Operational Performance podcast. I'm Greg Schenkel, the president of Unique Training and Development and Frontline Leadership Systems. And of course, we focus on a few things that we want you to get out of every one of these podcast episodes. We want to help you make things go faster and better in the organization, some of the projects and initiatives that you're working on. We want to help you also with your personal growth and development and basically get more done with less stress and aggravation. So my guest today, I'm really pleased to welcome Ayesha Shah, and she is a people and culture executive, speaker, and author with extensive expertise in fostering creativity and developing empowered leaders. Currently serving as the Vice President of Human Resources for the Corporation of Massey Hall and Roy Thomson Hall. And anyone who's a Canadian, especially Ontarian or a Torontonian, if any of those words apply to you, it's a huge performance complex, and it's featured in the Toronto Film Festival. When you see the stars walking the streets, they're often housed at one of the venues that Ayesha's corporation manages. She's also a professor and a highly sought-after coach, committed to human development as a key strategy for business success. As a thought leader, she speaks and writes on various topics related to work life and leadership. She believes the future of work is human, bright, connected, and fearless. So happy you can join us today, Ayesha.
Hi, Greg. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a real pleasure because I know our audience is really going to appreciate some of the latest things that you've been working on, including this TEDx talk that we're going to have you walk us through a little bit of the key concepts from it. But Ayesha is the author of The Mindset Prism, Freeing Your Mind and Unlocking Limitless Possibilities. Ayesha, can you take us through a little bit of what that thinking is and what that framework is?
Absolutely. So I came to realize through both my personal and professional experiences that we all have stories. We all have narratives that run in our minds. They're informed by our experiences, and they tend to be a protective mechanism for us as well. And that can serve a purpose, but it can also become a limiting factor for us. And so I realized that people that are extremely successful in relationships, which is actually a key skill for leadership as well, and so people that are professionally successful as well, and the ones that are really inspiring people tend to have certain qualities and certain views and beliefs about themselves, about the world. And that's what the book is about. It's about helping all of us tap into that, because that's like a boundless reservoir we all have within ourselves. It's resourcefulness, it's compassion, it's clarity. And so my book walks us through sort of being in the the mode that we tend to all fall into, which is an unconsciousness about the narrative in our minds, to really bringing it to our awareness and to becoming very intentional and mindful about what that narrative is and what do we really believe. And where are we coming from? Are we coming from a place of inspiration? Are we coming from a place of fear? And then to be able to work with ourselves to really break through some of those limitations that keep us stuck in certain parts of our lives and certain levels within our lives. And when I first discovered this, it was very challenging because I was like, they say the truth will set you free, but first it'll make you upset. Well, it certainly upset me, but then I realized how empowering it is to realize that we are all capable of, becoming aware of our views and our beliefs and our perspectives, and to not identify them, but to actually be able to mold them and expand them into something that really does serve us well. And so that's what this is about. And one of my favorite poets is Rumi, and he says, "Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open?" And I think it really applies some of these, beliefs and mindsets that we have and the narratives that we have kind of become a little bit of like the prisons. They're first the fortress that protect us, but then they become the prisons. So it's like all we have to do is step out of it.
Very, very interesting take. And it's in my line of thinking. I'm really much more open-minded now that I'm in my mid-50s versus when I was earlier in life. I kind of really believed a lot of the stories that were fed to me without questioning them, including the ones that I designed myself. And now,
Mhm.
if anything, I'm probably so liberalized, I really question pretty much everything that you think that you believe in and realize that most of it is a construct, either that you inherited from other people or that you've bought into as presented by other people. So I think it's very, I think people appreciate having these beliefs and these stories, but like you said, they can either be enabling or they can be imprisoning, I suppose. Um, in your book, well, actually, I am intrigued, and I know that this isn't officially released yet, but you've done a recent submission, and perhaps it'll get published as a TEDx talk. But I'm interested in your storytelling and specifically the idea of your origin story. I think that's fascinating. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I actually feel very passionately about this. And I really appreciate sort of how you connected with the concept of the book as well. Um, so my TEDx talk is really inspired by my book. And I've actually created a framework in my book, which is also part of the TED Talk. And the title of my TEDx talk was um, Unleashing Our Inner Superheroes and the
Mm.
Transformative Power of Origin Stories. So we all are captivated and surrounded by a series of origin stories. There's the scientific story of evolution. There are the biblical stories of the origin of humanity. But we also have superheroes and fictional stories, and it really explains, like, okay, Batman, the origin story, like what made Batman Batman. And if you go down and see, it's like always the childhood. Or if you look at Superman, it's like out of this world, just kind of came here, but was sort of like an exile. So a little bit of that hero's journey. And it's sort of a dominant arc in a lot of the storytelling mythology, but also in our lives as well. And so that idea of origin stories, it not just being limited to mythology or us trying to understand the origin of humanity or the origin of a dog breed or anything really. It's like being able to kind of see ourselves and recognize we all have origin stories, and these origin stories aren't just narratives. They become the very fabric of our identity, and so they become the lens through which we see the world. They become the filters through which we perceive and experience our interactions with the world, how we relate to others, how we show up, the things we put our hands up for, the things that we shy away from. A bunch of my friends have often heard some or said some version of people like us don't do things like this. It's like it is so pervasive, but it's often not talked about. So what I talk about in my talk, which is obviously inspired from the book, is a framework that I've come up with, which allows people to sort of work with themselves and sort of separate themselves from the narrative a little bit. And when you can separate yourself enough, you can actually see it as a picture plane. And then you can you can get close and acknowledge your own experience, which is the first step of the framework. It's about tuning in and becoming really aware of our own experience. What do we really believe? To your point, what are things that we inherited because of where we were born, where we were raised, how we were raised? Then our own experiences and how those interactions shape them further. And then going from just tuning in and things like that and becoming aware of our piece of it to kind of zooming out and looking at other people. And this step is about recognizing that we see people as a fraction of who they really are. And we tend to project our own experiences, our own perceptions on people. And often we know nothing about these people.
Yeah, it's
So,
interesting that you say that we apply our narrative actually
yes.
starts to cloud our perceptions of others. And the example that we'll use sometimes in conflict resolution is when someone does an action that you find isn't nice, like cuts you off in traffic or seems rude or insensitive, doesn't follow the rules. It is interesting, and especially if you go into the ladder of inference and like how all these ideas and circumstances get filtered, and we start ascribing them meaning instead of just looking at the action that occurred. we start to actually build a narrative story that this person's a terrible human being because they cut me
Yes.
off in traffic, even
Yes.
though if we cut people off in traffic, we probably wouldn't want other people to think as a narrative that we're a terrible human being. And
Yes.
because that then affects how we react to it and makes it quite inflammatory in most cases, yeah, you've really got to think through the filters of. I would say, though, that human beings have this need to a fixed narrative. So then it's a
Mhm.
question of whether you can adjust the narrative in your mind or an alternate narrative that would be
Yeah.
slightly more, well, at least maybe a lot more positive. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I think you just talked about the next step in the framework. So I'm glad that this is intuitive and it's connecting with you. Because yes, we see people as villains who let us down or hurt us, or we see and we judge people and we know nothing about these people.
No.
And I think once we can acknowledge that, um, we can reframe the story we're telling ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And in that reframing is really where our own personal power lies. People think power is about manipulation or controlling other people or their behaviors or having the louder narrative. It really isn't. True power is a very quiet quality. And the heart of true power is this I call it extraordinary compassion. And this extraordinary compassion is part of the framework. It runs through every single step of the process.
Okay, well,
And
I've been looking forward to you bringing up this extraordinary compassion. So, how is extraordinary compassion either different or a deeper dive on empathy? Help our listeners and viewers kind of think about that.
yeah, look, what I've learned, and I think there's many experiences of this. I say extraordinary compassion because I think we all have a degree of compassion in us. I think, that's just how I see people and myself. But I say extraordinary compassion because when you're trying to shift something, so when you're trying to reframe something, you need to dig for more than your ordinary amount of compassion. So that's why I call it extraordinary compassion. But compassion is the quality of witnessing without judgment, in my opinion. And so when you can see someone do something, make a choice, speak certain words, that you, instead of judging them as good or bad, right or wrong, can you just acknowledge their expression or their experience in this? And I think empathy is a function and very deeply correlated to compassion, because what compassion allows us to do is to understand things that we personally have little or no experience of. And so it's actually the ability to grant the other person their experience, holding them harmless, to have this presence with people that is benevolent, that isn't judging, that isn't interfering, but allowing. And I think sometimes people mistake it to say, well, you need to have boundaries. Of course, you need to have boundaries. That's compassion isn't about being a doormat. It's about this inner strength that doesn't need to see things in a very binary, limited way, but to actually create space for the expression and to be able to be so present with it without judgment that you can actually find the important takeaway from that.
Yeah.
And it's also this view that each person carries their own unique inner wisdom. And it may not be very apparent to us right out of the gate, but if we allow it without judgment to unfold, and create safety around it and trust that the experience people are expressing or the feelings they're feeling or the choices they're making to some degree makes sense to them.
Oh, good. I
If we
thought
can allow
I hoped you were going to go there because I was about to say that even the most strange behavior, when you perceive it from your vantage point, to that person it makes total sense. They have a framework in their own mind that rationalizes their behavior because of their own narratives and backgrounds, right? So I think that I don't know about you, Ayesha, because I think, first of all, we're talking to Ayesha Shah, and of course you can observe her or contact her through her website, theayeshashah.com. And Ayesha, I know you're enlightened. I'd like to think I'm semi-enlightened, but still have trouble like the way my brain is wired, it still sees these things. It still tries to posit this story that isn't necessarily constructive. And I'm guessing even with your level of enlightenment, you still have this problem too. And so what is it about, or what can you suggest to people who still acknowledge, yeah, I have these negative thoughts, or I have these negative biases, or I have this negative perception of what an individual's actions were, or I want to label it as smart or stupid or whatever it is. Do you have anything that is a good mental trick for people to employ? Because I still think the brain sometimes will put this up because those stories are deeply embedded, aren't they?
They are. And, when I talk about extraordinary compassion, it's not just extending it out to the world, it's also extending it to ourselves. It's to recognize that we are so much, like we've lived so much life. We have our own preferences, our own desires, our own sensitivities. And we have to honor them. And the way we honor them sometimes is, in a situation where we're confronted with someone that is really challenging us and challenging our ability to be compassionate, is become curious about what within you is being triggered, right? Mm-hmm. I have a sense of right and wrong. When I see people being unkind towards each other or use language that is derogatory, like it really hurts me. And so when that happens, it's hard for me to have compassion for people who are expressing themselves that way. So you asked me if there's any tricks or tips or tricks. I think the first one is to really be compassionate with yourself as well, and recognize that there is something that you're experiencing, that you're witnessing, that is not settling with you, that isn't aligned with your values. It isn't aligned with who you identify yourself as, and the things you want to be exposed to or you want to experience. And I think when you're able to do that, that gives you the choice. Sometimes the best we can do is walk away. And that's the compassion that we can show to ourselves and to the others. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we can muster more compassion and we can still be with that situation. And then I think it's important to depersonalize it. So one of the tricks I use is, there's a word for it. It's called metacognition, or some people call it witness consciousness. Mm-hmm. So instead of being in this place where you're really absorbing it, you start to kind of, instead of allowing it in, you start to focus out.
Well, what you're saying is you pop yourself out as an observer, yes, as opposed to being in it, yes, wholeheartedly just by yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, just be a witness. Yeah. So just observe. It's kind of like you're watching a movie and you're in that movie too. And so you're watching yourself have your reactions, but you're watching the other person as well. And as you do this, the other tool that's really interesting, excuse me, is curiosity. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, okay, there's what I'm seeing, but there's definitely something here that I don't know. And so if I am able to, while being compassionate with myself, be present here, can I look for that? Sometimes it's just watching it, allowing it, letting it happen. And sometimes it's interrupting it with a question. I think a lot of times we interrupt things by saying, don't do that, or, this or that. But that doesn't always bring the other person to a level where they can engage with it. It's just shutting them down, and that can have a different reaction. But
by the way, Ayesha, even with yourself, right? Because if I question myself, which is to say, why is this getting me so upset? Or why am I reacting this way to it? Even if you could just occasionally think that way, just to do a little deeper dive onto it. So you're saying you could do that with other people, you can do it with yourself. I know one of the things that seems adjacent to this extraordinary compassion would be intentionality. And mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you could draw the linkage between one and the other, because I would think that there is a linkage between the two.
I think the intention is just us being aware of how we're showing up, and what do we want, who do we want to be in the situation. And I think who we want to be in a situation is a different question than what do we want out of a situation. And when we focus on who we want to be in a situation, then being able to show up in that way and being willing to co-create in that situation, I think there's an inner flexibility with it. And if your intention is to present with extraordinary compassion, if it is a high value that you hold dear, then the way that you show up with compassion, I think it just allows you to be more present, listen intently. And when you're listening intently, you're able to pick on things that are subtle, that can give you clues to really helping resolve a conflict, to really helping de-escalate a situation in a way that's actually far more impactful. So to tell someone to stop doing something, and sometimes there's a place for that as well, so don't get me wrong. But I think if the intention is to be compassionate and to inspire others to be as great as they can be, which I think is the real impact we get to have as leaders and as human beings, is we influence each other, we touch each other, whether we like it or not. So if our intention is to be with people and then be with them regardless of what they're going through, I think that opens up ways within ourselves that allow others to find their own inner greatness. And I often think it's being able to see people, being really able to witness their pain or their concerns or their fears or even their joy and the things that inspires them. And I think that is very compelling because we all want to be seen. We all want to be heard. In situations where things escalate, it's because somebody's need is not being met. And so I think that intention of how you want to show up, if you show up already having made up your mind about something, it becomes less open to us to actually find those ways within ourselves or to even allow that space to the other person to show up, or for us to be able to ask the questions that can inspire a different understanding or a pause in whatever else is happening. So intentionality really is about the disposition and how we show up and what are we really trying to get out of a situation. And if it's about being compassionate, being a partner, being a supporter, being a coach, being a friend, then I think that intention of who we want to be really drives how we behave and how we interact in the situation.
Yeah, I know. Thanks, Ayesha. One of the things that it struck me lately, although I have to continually remind myself, is to try to start with empathy first in any conversation, is just to see if you can at least acknowledge the other person's situation in that, their circumstance in that situation. I wondered if you would be able to share, because I know that you help organizations, but you also help individuals. You've done some individual coaching. I'm curious if you've got an example that you can relate, or maybe your own personal example, where putting this kind of a concept or idea into practice either helped overcome an obstacle or unlocked someone's thinking. Can you share with us an example?
My God, there's so many examples. I'll share one. It's actually from a workplace. I've had the privilege and the joy of working with a lot of fantastic people over the course of my career, and many of them have influenced me and inspired me. I have a really dear friend that has been with me through, my own transformation, which is over a 10-year-long journey. And her best quality is she's in a very non-judgmental way. She stays very present with me. And when she gets a chance, she asks me questions. I think what I learned from her is she's like, I've always seen your greatness, but I also know the difficulty of some of your experiences. And she always comes with this perspective that I already know. I just am in a process. And so I've benefited from this friendship. This particular friend I've had in my life since I was 19 years old. So I just turned 40. So we've been friends for quite a while. I've had coaches who've sort of taken similar approach in working through the issue. It's always this belief that they're just with me and I already have the answer and they're helping me navigate my way through to it. And it doesn't matter how long it takes, and it doesn't matter how many detours I take. And then I think on the other side, where I've been able to do it with people, there's one example that comes to mind. I once worked with this really brilliant man, and he was just such a hardworking individual, a fantastic partner, like business partner in the office, in the professional environment, but a really dedicated father and partner to his wife. And um, I worked with him for a couple of years, and every year when we would, every time we had a coaching conversation, or every year when we would have that annual performance review, I would always ask him, like, so what are your goals for the next year? And his perspective was always around the things he does not want happening. So I don't want people to think I'm this. I don't want anyone to not get a response within this period of time. I don't want my kids to think that, I didn't really make a big impact in the world. I don't want my wife to think that I'm not, sharing in, she does a lot of these things around the house. I don't want her to think that I'm an absent this or that. And so after seeing this pattern over a couple of years, in one of the meetings, I actually said to him, I said, I hear you, and I think you're very consistently achieving that goal. I'm going to challenge you this time. And what I want you to come back to me in the next couple of weeks is, what do you actually want them to feel? Not what you're avoiding them from, not like what you don't want them to feel, but what do you really want to inspire in them? And maybe less about you and more about what you want to inspire in them about you or about them and their ability to solve problems. And he went away, and 2 weeks later he came back and he's like, okay, I have some thoughts, but I have to tell you, it's a real challenge to make this shift because I've always seen the world through this way.
Yeah.
It's like we're in the Matrix and you just gave me, the choice between a red pill and a blue pill.
Yeah.
So I think that that's the benefit of being with people who are able to see us and to actually be coached, but also to be able to coach people, is you can actually see the things that they're not seeing, but trust that they will figure it out instead of giving them the answers and giving them really powerful questions and reflections that they can then go and work with.
All right. Well, that's great insight. I wondered, Ayesha, as we get close to the end of the interview, is you, even though you're not as seasoned as I am age-wise, but you're also, I guess, not just starting out in your career. You've already achieved a high degree of success. I wondered what advice you would give to a person who's sort of closer to the start of their professional career about things to maybe pay attention to that they may not really think about then that would serve them well as they move along if they want to progress. Do you have any, it's embedded in everything you've shared so far, but I wondered if you have specific recommendations or advice to someone who's younger and newer on their professional path.
So when I was younger, I had this need to be very perfect, to project this image of someone who was very confident. And, frankly, I was, because I was really willing to make the effort, do the thing, stay up late, not eat, not sleep, all those things, because I wanted this to be who I was. I really wanted to be somebody that was reliable, that was able to accomplish amazing things, solve complex problems, achieve credentials. And I think the advice, and so I'm going to say what advice I give myself, because I don't know everybody's challenges, but I know that was a challenge for me particularly, and I feel very equipped to address it. It's good to have confidence. And at a younger age, it's also good to have humility. And what that humility allows you to do is to be human. And it takes the pressure off of being able to solve and figure everything out. It takes the pressure off to appear perfect and to not ask for help because you can't appear like you don't know what's going on. And it allows you to seek support, which is you'll get coaches, mentors, colleagues, and collaborators that will just want to surround you. And what you'll create from that place is just qualitatively different. And how much you learn in that environment is just the reward in of itself. It becomes secondary to the achievement. And I think if I could have learned that at a younger age, I could have spared myself a lot of grief and a lot of loneliness.
Yeah.
So That's the one
Okay.
thing I'll say. And the second thing I'll say is to people that are really early in their career, because I did used to be a professor, I was a professor for a few years, and I was a student as well for a very long period of time. There's just this angst to get to a place, to have a certain thing like a job, a title, an organization that you're a part of, certain achievements. And I think those drives are really sacred. We should hold them close to our heart and we should follow our dreams. And as we do that, I think we need to find a little bit of flexibility in how we think that comes about. Because the way we approach these things, like everybody ends up getting a job. But if you're coming from a place of, I need a job now and I need it to be here, then, that disappointment or that inability to look at other options really puts you on a path where maybe down the road you realize there's other things that you could have been interested in. So it's great to have drive. It's great to know what you want, but leave a little bit of space for what you don't know. And if you do that, you'll create in a way, you'll make choices and you'll create in a way that's not coming from a place of, I just need the next thing versus the intentionality of what's the quality of this thing that I want? What's the quality of the relationships that I have? The quality of the work that I do, the quality of the life that I have. And if you can hold both of those things together, I think it's just far more powerful. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I think it's funny how when you're very driven, as you're suggesting, how much whatever it is means to you, and yet if you look at most people, what they end up doing is not what they thought that they would be doing at a young age, or even if they do that. So maybe as a young as a high schooler, you thought, I'm going to become a doctor, and you do become a doctor, but even that doesn't really always is it fulfilling in achieving your goals. So it's the life that happens on your way to your supposed goals, and how even a deviation from those goals might end up being better, because how did you know up front where it is that you needed to end up? You just had a thought about what might work. And that's based on the narrative, really, that you believed in early on, that you set for yourself. So, Ayesha, I just want to say thank you for joining us on the podcast. Again, anyone who wants to learn more about Ayesha could, of course, connect with her on LinkedIn, Ayesha Shah, or visit her website at theayeshashah.com and dig in a little deeper. And then if you start to follow Ayesha's work through LinkedIn or through her website, then you'll be able to see when that storytelling video hopefully gets published. So again, thank you, Ayesha, for, I know you bring a lot of value to the organization that you're working in now, and obviously you've brought a lot of value to people through this podcast. So thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thank you for having me, Greg, and for your own insight and curiosity, and for being present with me and connecting with my work. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, good stuff. So anyway, I hope that if you've been listening and watching to this episode, that you have a number of things that will at least cause you to reflect on your own thinking, the stories that you believe in, whether those narratives are helping you or not helping you, and whether you can be extraordinarily compassionate or more so in your interactions with others. Again, our podcast exists to help you personally and professionally. And if we can be of any assistance to you or your organization through our frontline leadership training, our management development, and our new site leader development program, please reach out to us. It all starts with a conversation, and you can connect with me at uniquedevelopment.com.